Good afternoon, or good morning. It's still good morning, I believe. I want to say thank you for coming out on this fabulous Charlotte fall day to have a very important conversation with a very important person that we will hope to see in January on a stage being inaugurated as the next president of the United States. I think that's why we're here. But before I talk about the seriousness of this conversation, what I'd like to do is make sure that everyone recognizes where we are. We are in Camp North End, but more importantly, we're in a place where creativity flourishes. The artists that have worked on the art that you're going to see today, we have to recognize them. They're people that give so much, and they don't get paid enough. And that's the kind of thing that we're beginning to see. In a pandemic, we ought to be rewarding people that are doing the work that makes us better people, and that's what artists do. So I want to recognize Dammit Wesley. Stamming around? Okay. Gianna McCants. Where's Gianna? Gianna? Carla Aaron Lopez. Garrison Giss. Marcus Kaiser. Michaela Benter. Frank Zombie, and John Harrison. They have done the mural that says, Camp North End, Charlotte, North Carolina, Build Back Better. And we all know whose plan that is. So thank you very much for being here this morning. And I am going to say that I would like to introduce someone that you're all familiar with, someone that you probably don't know that is a big professional bowling fan, that likes minor league baseball, but I'll let you figure out what you really know him for. So thank you. Let's welcome our next guest.
How y'all doing? How y'all doing? Mayor Lyles, thank you so much. Vice President Biden, welcome to Charlotte, North Carolina. Feels so good to be home. You guys know I was in a bubble for a while recently. Man, this is important. This is extremely important, and that's why I'm glad to be a part of this conversation. Being born and raised in North Carolina, this is home for me. Always will be home for me. And so to be a part of this conversation and to just have real conversations. We had a conversation in the back, and I just thought about how grateful and privileged I am to be a part of these tough, difficult conversations, especially during this time. Being a parent, having an 11-year-old son, an 8-year-old daughter, these times are very crucial and very important. And I can't explain enough how much it means to talk about the things that have to be discussed. And you guys being here, everything is about respect. Everything is about respect. So teaching my kids about respecting the office, having these conversations, and that's why this election is important. A lot of times people say my vote doesn't count. I come from humble beginnings where a lot of people where you live and stuff say it doesn't matter. You know, as black people, it doesn't matter. You know, if I vote, what's gonna really change? You know, we still got the same restaurants on the corners. We don't have the benefits of having places to eat. You know, our homes, that's not gonna change, right? So the only way that we can really enforce our power is by voting. So this conversation is unbelievably important. So glad you guys are here so that we can ask some real questions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the next president of the United States, Joe Biden.
Hello. My name is Joe Biden. I'm trying to get a job with Chris. He is Mr. President. He's President of the Union. Mr. President, I was kidding him. You know, the only thing harder than being president of a union is being the mayor of a beautiful city. Folks, thanks for taking the time to be here today. I really appreciate it. And we even have an astronaut in our house. And I tell you what, that's pretty cool, Tone. Look, first of all, I want to thank Chris and the mayor for being here and all of you for being here. And, you know, these are tough times. Over 200,000 Americans have passed away, or 200,000. And the number's still rising. And the impact on communities is bad across the board, but particularly bad for African-American communities. Almost 4 times as likely to 3 times as likely to catch the disease, COVID, and when it's caught, twice as likely to die as white Americans. It's a sort of emblematic of the inequality that exists and the circumstances that exist. And one of the things that really matters to me is it didn't have to be this bad. You have 30 million people in unemployment. You have 20 million people figuring whether or not they can pay their mortgage payment this month and what they're going to be able to do or not do as a consequence of that. And you've got millions of people who are worried that they're going to be thrown out in the street because they can't pay their rent, although they're given a reprieve for 3 months, but they have to pay double the next 3 months when it comes around. How are people going to do that? And the way, in fact, the Democratic House and the Senate passed it, stepped up and passed a significant amount of money to help people get through the process, including keeping businesses open and the like. Well, guess what? They insisted there be a thing called an inspector general, somebody watching where every dollar went. And the first thing the President of the United States did is fire that inspector general. There is no inspector. He's fired. And so you got only 40% of the money intended for small businesses going to small businesses. Only 40% of it. 60% has gone to the Mar-a-Lago crowd. In addition to that, we find ourselves in a circumstance where the idea that we're going to continue to provide for unemployment insurance for people is very much in doubt, although the House just passed a package today. My generic point is that the University of Columbia pointed out that if, in fact, the president had acted, even though we know now, he knew exactly how bad the pandemic was back in February. He's on tape with Bob Woodward saying he knew how bad it was. And he didn't say a thing. He didn't say a thing. And if he had spoken, as I said, they said at Columbia 1 week earlier, 37,000 more people would be alive today. And we're going to have another influx of cases between now and January. It's expected that we're going to have somewhere between, depending on which estimate you take, between 138 and 178,000 more deaths. And if people just do what we're doing here, and when you're at a social distance, as I am, you can take a mask off, but wear a mask. They estimate that would save about close to 89, 90,000 people. And so it's about being responsible. It's about being responsible. And we're not being very responsible. But what I want to talk to you about today is that, we have to break a cycle. The cycle that exists is that the African-American community, by and large, finds itself at the bottom of the economic heap when businesses and others, when things are good. When things get bad, they're the first ones in the hole. And when things get better, they're the last ones out. In addition to that, we have a criminal justice system that needs significant repair. And we're just only beginning slightly to make some progress now. And thirdly, if you're a business person, let me put it this way. Every person out there wants an opportunity to make it for their family. My dad used to have an expression, everybody's entitled to be treated with dignity. And then he'd say, Joey, a job is about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about your place in the community. It's about being able to hold your head up. It's about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, everything's going to be okay. For too many people, particularly in the African-American community, they can't say that. That's not able to be done. So one of the things that I want to talk with you about today is how do we build wealth? Because ultimately, the African-American community only is going to have its place equal to everyone else when they're in a position to be able to build wealth. And that goes for everything from access to being able to purchase a home, access to jobs, access to just being able to have an even shot. And that's what I hope we're going to talk a little about today. And it goes to education, as well as access to education, access beyond, everything from a lot of poor whites and poor African Americans and Hispanic live in Title I districts, meaning that they live in school districts that have very low tax base. And right now we spend $15 billion a year to compensate for that low tax base. I increased that to $45 billion. What it does, it keeps teachers in schools because we're short teachers significantly. 125,000 teachers short right now. We'll be over 500,000 by 2023. In addition to that, we find ourselves in a circumstance where we used to have in our schools in the old days, one, right now we don't have any, we virtually have no school psychologists in our schools. And so teachers come into school and they're expected to solve every problem. Well, there's one school psychologist for every 1,507 kids in school. It should be closer to 1 to 500. We can do that by increasing the money I just talked about from 15 to 45. And send every single child that's 3 years old, 4 years old, and 5 years old, not to daycare, but to school. All the studies of the great universities in this state and every other have pointed out in the last 8 years, that will increase by 58% their chance of going all the way through school, no matter what the zip code they come from, no matter where they are, and be able to do it without getting themselves in trouble. And then we're going to talk about, I think a big issue here is access to apprenticeships and access to community colleges and college, and the student debt requirements that are there. I hope we can talk about that. But I want to talk about basically one big important thing. How do we change the dynamic? This is a gigantic opportunity. As bad as things have gotten, the blinders have sort of been taken off the American people now. They look out there and we have a pandemic, unemployment, we have race relations that are just been drawn into focus, and everything from police brutality to lack of access. But the American people have all of a sudden, average people have gone, my Lord, holy mackerel, I didn't know it was this bad. A lot of them didn't know. A lot did. But a lot didn't know it was this bad. And, talking to, well, I won't go into it. I'm talking too much now in my opening statement. But here's the point. The point is, I believe we have a gigantic opportunity to fundamentally change the systemic racism and the systemic problems that exist in our system. And I think we have to do it, but only one way to do it. We got to show up and vote. But I believe the American people are not going to be turned off. I believe no matter what the administration does to try to make it hard to vote for everyone, not just people of color, but everyone, no matter what, I think they're going to vote. You see what's happened in Virginia, early voting. They have 4-hour lines in the first day, and we're over 40 days out. People are going to show up and vote. They will not be dissuaded. And so that's why I'm optimistic. I was asked by one of the foreign leaders when I was overseas, when I was in vice president, they said, can you define America for me? I said, yes, I can, in one word, possibilities. Possibilities. We're the only country that believes anything's possible. But it's about time we make it possible for everybody. That's what this is all about. I think we got a gigantic opportunity in the year 2020 to make these changes. And with that, as my mother would say, I'm going to hush up and take any questions y'all have. And I'm going to get out of the way here.
Far from a star, but appreciate it. My first question, you sort of spoke about education, and for me, I'm the only person in my family that didn't go to an HBCU. And you, right down the street from Johnson C. Smith, North Carolina is known for having a lot of HBCUs. So my question would be, there's a lot that's not properly funding, sort of going under. So what would you sort of like to see, or what could you do for the historically black colleges and universities?
Well, I was kidding Chris inside. I was saying, as long as I can say what the best HBCU is in America, Delaware State University, but that's another issue. That's a joke, but it's not a joke. They're great. That's how I got my start, by the way. I went to the University of Delaware, but the reason I got involved in politics in the first place is because of what was going on in my state in terms of segregation and in terms of Dr. King being assassinated. Major part of our city was burned to the ground. That's how I got engaged, and a lot of my support came out of that HBCU. Look, right now, one thing all the data shows is that given an opportunity, an equal opportunity, there's not a single thing that an African American can't do that a white American can do, that a Hispanic American, an Asian American, not a single thing. And so what's happened? It's about access to opportunity and access to good jobs. Now, an awful lot of universities, like a great university like UNC or Wake Forest, a lot of schools, they have endowments. And the endowment allows them to provide for the circumstance to bid for these major federal initiatives that allow them to bring into the school a technology and a program that is able to bring in outside sponsors as well as government sponsors, and then have students work in those areas. For example, cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a big deal, but you have to, and as a future, there's going to be millions of, over time, good paying jobs in the area of cybersecurity. But because the HBCUs, for example, most of them don't have the they don't have the endowment to be able to build the facilities that can attract the environment, the government funding, as well as private endowment, they don't get to set these up. So, for example, when I was vice president, we went down near Roanoke and we provided funding for an HBCU to have a cybersecurity proposal. They did it. They got the contract. And now what they're doing, they're training young women and men who get out and good starting jobs where you can end up being paid more than $100,000 a year. And they're fully, totally, thoroughly capable. So what I've done is I proposed, and we'll get this done, I proposed a 10-year program for $70 billion for HBCUs. $70 billion. And that $70 billion will be available to the HBCUs based on their competition to get access to it, but everyone will qualify, every HBCU, and they'll be able to do the kinds of things that other universities do. For example, Delaware State University is a great university. The president of the university is a young man who used to work for me in my Senate office now. Brilliant guy, his doctorate. The end result of it is, though, when the University of Delaware makes an application for dealing with solar energy, because it has a significant base, it gets the significant injection of technological capability, or, for example, light metals. They took over an old facility. This used to be a Ford facility long time ago. They took over a facility, used to be a Chrysler facility, got shut down. And now what do they have at that facility? They have people in that facility who are now doing metallurgy that relate to making lightweight aluminum and metal decks for aircraft carriers. Well, it's a multi-million-dollar and will end up being $1 billion projects. And so the people who get to work on that, the very students in that university get to work on, they're the ones who are going to go out and get these great jobs. So that's the first thing I'm going to do for HBCUs. Secondly, we have to look at, and we have been looking at, the idea that we have to bring in HBCUs to engage in more of what we are doing in terms of our national dialogue. And for example, I kid two of the guys that are on my co-sponsors of my campaign, African Americans. They talk themselves as Morgan men. I'm a Morgan man. Well, there's a lot of great universities, including right here. But we have an opportunity to provide for you're able to get to those universities. How can you do it? Well, I'm going to see to it that anyone who comes from a family that makes a total income of less than $125,000 a year gets free college education. They don't get in. If they get in and qualify, they pay nothing to go to college. Secondly, there are also programs that exist now that if you provide for the work that you will volunteer to do something in the public interest, and you do it for 5 years or more, you can deduct $10,000 a year up to $50,000 off of that debt you have. And you have an awful lot of young African Americans who have graduated. The average debt is about $19,000 a year. Well, it's hard as hell to get started. Hard to get started when you have that debt hanging over your head. The average debt is even higher. It's up to $28,000 a year, someone graduating from 4-year school. And that's why the economists had predicted prior to, and I'll end with this, I'm telling you too much, but because I'm pretty passionate about this, what happens is that if, as we pointed out before the COVID crisis, that we're going to have an economic slowdown because the entire generation, this from 9/11 generation through to the generation now, and coming out of this god-awful circumstance we're in, they in fact are not going to have the wherewithal because of student debt to be able to borrow the money to buy a home, buy a new vehicle, buy an apartment, spend the money in capital, which a significant portion of our economy is driven by consumption, by consumption. And this generation, this whole new generation from 9/11 on, that in fact is they're not in a position to be able to do it. So there's a whole lot of reasons that economically this will benefit. This isn't just draining money. And by the way, I pay for every one of these things by the way I deal with the tax structure, but that's another story. So that's a piece of what I think we can and should be doing with HBCUs. And secondly, I will, in my administration, elevate elevate the standing of HBCUs by the people in my administration as well.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Vice President would like to hear from you, so I'd like to recognize someone that might have a question in this, for this forum. Yes.
There's a microphone right
There's
there.
a microphone right there, and there's one on this side as well, so.
Can you? Okay. Hi, I'm Hannah Bonaparte. I just was wondering, what are you going to do about minimum wage?
We're going to raise it to $15 an hour nationally. I've been deeply involved in raising it as I've gone around the country working with cities and counties that in fact have raised it, including New York City and out on the West Coast as well. Here's the deal. If you make less than $15 an hour, working 40 hours a week, you're making a wage under the poverty level. No one in America should be working for a 40-hour-a-week job and still be living in poverty. It should not exist, number one. Number two, it also demonstrates that if we pay people $15 an hour as minimum wage, you grow the economy. The idea that this somehow puts people out of business, there's no evidence of that. What happens is you have people, if you're making $15 an hour instead of $7 an hour, you're able to buy more things. You're able to pay more bills. You're able to do more that ends up increasing the GDP, the growth of the whole economy. So it's not only a good thing for the person who is going to be making a decent wage from the beginning, but going to be good for the economy as a whole.
Next question, yes, please.
Hi, I'm Andrea Brown. I'm a second grade teacher. Nice to meet you.
My mother would say, God love you, dear.
It's been difficult, but thank you. So thank you, Chris, for bringing up education in the HBCUs. But as far as K through 12 education, how do you plan to push access to educational equity?
Well, it's a simple proposition for me. I mean, I exaggerated as a second grade teacher why you're so important. If I had only $1 to spend in education, and I could spend it post-graduation or pre-kindergarten, I'd spend it pre-kindergarten. Not a joke. Because you know as well as I do, based on your educational background, that 60% of a child's brain is already developed by the time they're in the 3, 4, 5 years old. Right. And so what happens is people start off based on their zip code and their family background. They may start off way behind the curve. You know, you have a lot of students who, they come into school, if they come from a very poor background, in a community raised by a single mom or a single dad through no fault of their own, they will have probably heard 1 million fewer words spoken by the time they get to first grade. That by itself is an impediment. Nobody's forced that on anybody, but we got to change it. And so the way to change it is threefold. Number one, as I said, provide for early education starting at 3 years of age. And it's not, this is this, you think, oh my Lord, why do we have a 3-year-old go to school? They learn as rapidly as a 6-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old, and they just suck it all up. They just suck it all up, number one. Number two, to make sure that we pay teachers enough money to stay in the business of teaching. My wife's a full-time teacher. My wife has never stopped. As first lady, as second lady, I should say, she taught 15 credits every semester at a community college. Before that, she taught juniors and seniors in high school for 25 years. I think it was 25. But my point is, a long time. Yeah. Although I'm not allowed to tell the exact number because my wife is 30 years younger than I am. I started off not quite that much, but now there's no woman in the entire Biden family as old as any man. But that's another issue. But all kidding aside, the fact is that it is the lifeblood of, look, you know, people, they say, well, these children, they're all our children. They are the kite strings that lift our national ambitions aloft. Right. And it's bizarre, crazy for us. In every single empirical study done, the more money you spend, the better you educate a child throughout the process, the better the community as a whole is. Everybody, across the board. And so that's why we also have to make sure that we provide for more direct funding for specific programs in schools. Federal, you know, as you know, better than most will know, the bulk of all the funding for schools is local funding.
Right.
Local funding.
Right.
It's not national funding. It's not federal funding. But federal funding can focus on particular needs within schools. And one of those needs is to deal with access to equal education in the early grades and not be determined by your zip code. And that requires us to spend more money on schools that, in fact, and teachers. Look, I'm not going to ask you what you make, but teachers, one of the other things that that all the studies have shown is that when you're in a student body where there's students of color, it makes a gigantic difference if they're teachers of color, particularly male teachers of color.
Definitely.
A gigantic difference. It's just a factual predicate. And so we have to encourage schools of education to attract more people of color to get in and teach. But the only way to do that is raise the salaries.
Right.
Raise the salaries.
Right.
I mean, the idea that a teacher's out there after several years making $40,000 a year, they probably have student debt larger than that. So, no, for real. And that's why the last piece of the student debt, anybody who has a student debt who teaches, that counts as working for the national interest, and you get to deduct $10,000 of that student debt per year for 5 years and up to $50,000 if you're teaching.
That's amazing.
And we can afford this, by the way. This is not like, this is not something that we have. Just to give you a little idea, I carry this card with me because everybody says, well, Biden's going to raise all taxes and everybody's going to be in trouble and what we're going to do here. Let me see if I can find it, if I have it here. Anyway, I have a list of how I will fund every single thing that I'm talking about. For example, if we just made corporations not pay 21%, and 91 of the Fortune 500 companies pay no tax. Zero, okay? None. If we just made them pay 28, it used to be 38, make 28%, raise it to 28%, and everybody had to pay it, that would raise a total of $1,370 billion. I'm not trying to punish anybody. It's time everybody start paying their fair share. The president has a new proposal. Some of you may like it. I don't know anybody in my neighborhood knows very well. And that is that another $30 billion tax cut for billionaires. You think I'm making it like, billionaires sound like, Bernie Sanders, billionaires are bad. That's not the problem. Problem is reducing the capital gains tax. If you make your money off investments as opposed to sweat of your brow or waking up and getting a paycheck, right? He thinks you should only have to pay 15% of your income. So you'll pay more as a school teacher than somebody making $20 million if they have it's all coming from investments. That's not right. Again, don't want to punish anybody. Just about time everybody pays their fair share. And the way I do that is I raise the tax back for millionaires and billionaires to 39.4%. Not they're talking about 90%. That's not true. It was 39.4% when Bush was president. You just raise that tax rate back up to 39.4%. That raises 6%. That raises $90 billion. Just give you an example. So there's much more I could talk, but my point is, it will not, and by the way, I went to undergraduate and graduate school, but I was very flattered that I think it's 14 Nobel laureates in economics just endorsed me and said my plans make sense. All this stuff about Biden's going to bankrupt the country and Biden's going to spend $400 billion and you're going to raise your taxes. Not true. We can do it all by just starting to pay your fair share. That's all. That's all. And give people who need a break.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have time for one more question. Well, I think we're going to have time for 2 more questions, if that's okay, Mr. Vice President.
Maybe 3.
Okay, maybe 3.
I know I'm late, but I apologize.
Having some difficulty, sorry. Okay. Hello, nice to meet you. My name is Sabrina Collier. My husband and I, Chef Greg Collier, own restaurants here in Charlotte, one Uptown Yoke and one here in Camp North and Leah and Louise. And as you know, the restaurants have been hit severely hard the past
would it be 7 months now? And a lot of us, which are small business owners and small minority business owners, didn't receive as much relief nationally. The city of Charlotte has been amazing with offering grants and things that we can float us over and still pay our employees, but we still had to cut staff. We still had to cut hours. What would be the relief for us small business owners, specifically restaurants? Is there a plan to give us some type of relief? I don't know, a tax cut, anything?
Yes, there's a big plan to do it. There's multiple plans. First of all, the CARES Act, which passed out of the House and Senate, which was a total of $2 trillion overall, twice, was supposed to provide what they call the Main Street Lending Program. For 4 months, it didn't lend a penny. None of the money went out, number one, because you got 20 Republicans in the Senate who said they don't want to spend anything on anything, for real. And the president who has, as I said, fired the inspector general, so you don't know where the money's going for certain. Secondly, on the early program for small businesses, and the small business is defined of fewer than 50 employees. Now, most small businesses that are neighborhood small businesses are 10 or fewer employees. And so what I proposed is we focus on making sure that the money goes directly to those businesses that in fact provide for, be able to keep their employees on the payroll for the 10 or fewer employees. That's a priority, and then 50 and under. But here's what's happened. What's happened is that not only has that not occurred, a lot of the money has gone to very big businesses that didn't need they may need it, but they didn't need it to stay alive. And even when they got it, what did they do? The commitment was that I proposed, and we thought we had done, is that right now, if you get a government bailout, quote unquote, loan to stay alive, what you cannot do is take that money and either buy back your own stock and or increase your salaries with that money. It's to keep people employed, keep them on a payroll. Secondly, there's another program, and that's what a lot of the businesses have done. They buy back their own stock, increasing the net worth of the people who own the stock, and in fact pay their salaries based on stock. So they should not be allowed to do that, number one, in this with government money bailing people out. Secondly, a lot of you don't know the circumstance. Now, there's no national standard as to how to open. How do you open safely? The president says, just put up a sign, come on in. Well, you know your employee, beyond your employees, your customers are going to go, I don't know. I mean, does everybody have to have the mask, or they have dividers in the restaurant, or they have, tell me how the sanitary conditions are working? Well, you need money to pay for all that stuff. And that's why we propose to have a multi-billion-dollar program where businesses are able to get the money, not borrow the money, get the money to be able to open in the middle of this pandemic, including fixing the testing fiasco. You should be in a situation where your employees can, in 24 hours, get a test to determine whether or not they're positive or negative. You need to do that for your own protection, and the public likes to know that is protection for their employee, that their protection against anything that happens within your restaurant. So the bottom line is the money is already there. The president is just not releasing it. The department is not releasing the money. And it's all done in order to be able to keep the economy moving. Right now we have over 30 million people on unemployment. Over 30 million on unemployment. How in God's name are we going to generate economic growth unless we can figure out how to keep these people back and help you get back in business? It's the same way with schools. How many schools are not opening because there's no national standards set? No national standards set. For example, there's an outfit. Am I telling you too much? You want me to stop? Okay. I really get it. This drives me crazy. Right now, we're in a situation where if you take a look, there is no national standard for how to open schools, how to open them safely. Because the president says, I have no responsibility. It's not my responsibility. I mean, literally, that's his phrase. It's not my responsibility. I'm not to blame for any of this. Let the governors or the mayors take care of it. and everybody, and then without the financial help that's needed to be able to take care of it. And so what we need to do, I've laid out in detail back in July, what we'd have to do to open safely. And it includes providing the protective PPE, the mask, and other things that are needed, gloves, et cetera, for the schools, the school teachers, and for the children coming to school. Secondly, you have to reduce the number of students in one room. You have to have modules that are smaller. But for that, you need more teachers, not fewer teachers. You got to pay more teachers. Number three, you've got to be able to sanitize the schools, whether it's everything from the water fountain to the lavatory or just the surfaces that are touched and what is breathed on by people. That costs a lot of money to do that, like it would for a restaurant as well, if you'd have to do that. And so the money is there available to do that, but the president refuses. What he says is just open up and make sure that, just schools should just open up. When a lot of now, and it also relates to how far down you've got the reinfection rate. If it's down below 1, then it's rational. You can, with those protections, go ahead and open a school. But watch it very closely. But it requires testing and tracing to make sure you're still on course there. And look, the other thing is that if you think about it, the FEMA, the Federal Emergency, they had agreed that they were going to provide masks for schools. They started to hand them out to schools. Well, guess what? The president didn't like that, or somebody didn't like that. So they said the ruling was made, opening schools safely is not a national emergency. So they stopped it, refusing to even provide masks for schools because it's not a national emergency. Well, if this isn't a national emergency, I don't know what the hell is. So the way we're doing this is the way, I'll end with this. The president was in Ohio, I guess a couple days ago at a rally. I don't want to misquote him. And he said at the rally, and I wrote this down, he said that we're virtually turned the corner. Nobody is really dying. He said, yeah, elderly people are dying, and they're dying because they have heart conditions, others, but quote, quote, they're virtually nobodies. They're the only ones dying. So you go home and your mom's gone, your dad's gone. He's a virtual nobody? The idea, the way we're talking about people, and this is all within our power to do something. The virus wasn't his fault, but the way he's handled it has been close to criminal. And so many people breaking their necks. And by the way, my deceased wife, when I first got married, I married a beautiful woman from Syracuse, New York, Skaneateles, New York, and I got elected when I was 29 years old. I come from a very modest family. I was not bragging about it, but I was listed as the poorest man in Congress for 36 years because I didn't think you were supposed to earn any money while you're there other than your salary. And then when I got elected vice president, one of the press outlets said it's probable no man has ever been assumed the office of vice president with fewer assets than Joe Biden. I hope they weren't talking intellectual assets. And so, but when I got elected when I was 29, I was in Washington before I was sworn in, and I got a phone call from my fire department saying my wife and daughter had just been killed, and my 2 boys were not likely to make it. A tractor-trailer broadsided them while they were Christmas shopping. And at the time, my wife's father, my father-in-law, he came home from World War II, and he had owned a restaurant. He was a cook in World War II in the Navy, and he ended up opening up a restaurant in a place called Auburn, New York, a town of about 20,000 people just south of Syracuse. And it became the meeting place for everybody. It's a place that doctors would start off the morning, getting their coffee, and the lawyers would have their lunch, and kids after graduations would come to this called the Hunter Diner On, and then he opened up other restaurants. And in order to try to convince me to stay, I don't blame him, I do the same with my daughter, try to convince me after we graduated to take a job in upstate New York rather than go back to Delaware. he offered me his prize diner that was, and he was making at that time, I would have made 5 times what I made as a lawyer. The starting lawyer's salary was $6,000, and it was $30,000 a year. But the problem was, for 5 years, I watched how hard he worked. I don't know how you do it. You gotta love it. Even in good times, you think you're crazy. It's 24 hours a day, but you deserve a break. And your employees deserve a break. And the fact you're fighting so hard to keep them on the job is a testament to the kind of people you are. But I promise you, I guarantee you, if I'm elected, you'll get both the PPE, you'll get also the money to be able to open, and the additional money, not only to maintain your employees, but to maintain an open place that you in fact can. I've met with a lot of restaurateurs up and around the country, so they can open up and do everything from having plastic shields in front of the cashiers to a lot of things you can do to make it safe. Make it safe, and you'll get the help.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I can really do yes or no if you ask me easy questions.
All right, so we have one more easy question. It's going to be an easy question. This is one of my colleagues. He serves on the Charlotte City Council, Malcolm Graham, with me.
I used to be a city councilman. I ran for the Senate because it was too hard. They know where you live.
Exactly. First, I want to thank you. You honored me and my family by sending a video tribute for my sister, Cynthia Graham Hurd.
Oh, my Lord, I apologize.
No.
I didn't know. I'm sorry.
No. Who was, as you know, killed at the
Yes.
Emmanuel AME church shooting in Charleston. And so my question is, how do you reimagine the Justice Department and specifically the Civil Rights Division after 4 years of Trump?
Well, first of all, and I guess I'll just say it, this has been the most corrupt administration in modern American history. The Justice Department has turned into the president's private law firm. He actually has them representing him on women who accused him of rape, and I mean, where does that come from? And the Justice Department under my administration will be totally independent of me. I will not direct them who to prosecute, how to prosecute, what to prosecute, and I will not be I will not enter their decisions based upon the judgments they make about what cases they bring and they don't bring. With regard to the Civil Rights Division, I would significantly increase 2 things. One, civil rights presence in the Justice Department and elevate it so it has access to and transparency into all police departments' activities across the country, just so they are aware, there's transparent what's going on. I would also make sure that I elevate the Justice Department, the Civil Rights Division, to have a direct office inside the White House. When, for example, I'm the guy that wrote the Violence Against Women Act. When the president asked me what I wanted as vice president, I said I want to have jurisdiction over that act inside the White House because it elevates the standing of whatever that office that comes inside the White House. So I would make sure there's a combination of the Civil Rights Division having more direct authority inside the Justice Department and being able to investigate than, in fact, it has now. But most of all, I would have an attorney general who understood his oath of office, not a joke. An attorney general has an oath of office that, in fact, could do and move on what the professionals in the department thought had to be pursued without my interfering to say, no, they're my friends, or they're my, I know them, or I don't, or go after this person, like, go after Hillary, or, what I mean, this kind of stuff. I get asked the question all the time by the press that travels with me, although I'm not sure the same ones that are traveling today have asked it, but I get asked the following question. If, in fact, you get elected, would you prosecute Trump? Would you pursue prosecuting Trump? And the answer is, I'm not going to pursue prosecuting anybody. I'm going to do what the Justice Department says should be done, and not politicize it. It's the most dangerous thing that's happened so far, is the politicization of the Department of Justice. It's become the Department of Trump, and that's wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for the very, very heartfelt feelings, but more importantly, for having policies that really follow who you are as a person. So on behalf of all of the people that are here today, thank you for giving us your time, but more importantly, giving us the changes that you see for our country. We really appreciate that.
Thank you. Who's the fellow who runs 26 organizations for housing? The public. I know we didn't get a chance to talk. Because I think what you're doing is incredibly consequential. And I'd like to give you a paper on the way out, is what I think we can and should do. It's very detailed. And I'd love your feedback. I'll put a phone number on it, okay? Because it is a gigantic, gigantic, gigantic undertaking. And unless we can get people into housing, unless we can provide for housing, unless we can stop the gentrification where people are left out, we're going to be in real trouble. And what you're doing is really, I'm not trying to boost him. I've never met the gentleman, but I did read your bio and what you're working on. And I'd really like your input and maybe be able to call you if I could after you get what I'm proposing in detail and see what we can work out. And I'm part of the reason I do this, and what I miss about being able to do larger engagements is this is where I learn. I'm a tactile guy. I mean, I'd rather be shaking your hand and looking in the eye and you telling me what needs to be done. But I'd like your, and don't be reluctant at all to criticize my plan if you think it doesn't make sense. I think it's pretty good. I've worked on it really, really hard. It goes from Section 8 housing all the way to first-time home buyers to the whole notion of these. Anyway, I'd like you, I'm going to give it to you before I leave, okay?
Yeah.
You're very polite to sit here all
Thank
this
you.
time. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Phil.
In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov.